She's been smiling all day in the sun down here. Leslie Silko.
Let's see, first thing I have to get used to this. Those of you in the forum at noon today, we were in a room, it was a smaller room, and I didn't use one of these. I like to just not have to use these kinds of things, but in a bigger room you have to, so I'll probably gesture with my hand and hit it a couple of times and maybe talk too closely into it, but I don't like these things. Well, let's see. Usually, and I guess even for this appearance, they sort of book me as a poet, but I think of myself more as a storyteller, and that's what I really love to do. I get started with the storytelling and the stories, and I lose all track of time. That's my wristwatch over there. I was going to try to watch it so that I didn't exhaust you. What I'd like to do, though, is do some of the things that I really love to do, the storytelling, and then I'll do a few poems. I love to write poems. I don't want you to misunderstand me, but I don't enjoy reading poetry as much as I enjoy doing stories. So we'll get started this way. Storytelling, the kind of storytelling that I'm into, is something that is very much a part of where I grew up, and it's an ongoing thing. This kind of storytelling is something that, as long as the people at Laguna can still have enough strength to speak, why, this will go on. I think it's this way with a lot of other Indian people in different places, and I know with the Chicano people, and maybe somewhere, in rural areas with, white people too. Anyway, this is a story that is sort of X-rated. It's called Laughing and Laughing About Something That Happened at Mesita. Mesita is a village near Laguna where I grew up. And people at home live for good stories. And the happiest thing that can happen to you is to hear a good story that you can tell to your friends for the rest of the day. And this is one of the stories. It goes like this. There was this man from Mesita, and he was seeing this woman, and she wasn't young either, and she was married too, just like him, with 5 or 6 kids. Anyway, the story goes this way. This man's wife had caught these two together before, or maybe she just heard about them. I don't know. Maybe some of her neighbors told her. Well, anyway, it was in the summertime after the corn got tall. That day it was hot and past noontime, and everybody was inside resting or sleeping. And that is what these two were counting on. While everybody else was inside resting from the heat, they could lay down with each other out in the cornfield. I don't know whose field it was, but I guess they waited until all the other people left and went inside to eat lunch. Well, there they were, I guess, on the shady ground, a little damp from last week's rain, sort of cool maybe, and all surrounded by the tall corn with the leaves rustling in the breeze. They were deep into those places that people go when they are together like that, when his wife showed up. She didn't go there by herself. She brought her 2 sisters along with her. They knew what was going on, and they were just waiting to catch them together. So they caught them. And the man and that woman jumped up, and they put on their clothes, and all that time the wife and the sisters were standing there, silent, probably because they didn't have anything to say. And then that other woman left, and the man was alone with his wife and sisters-in-law. And by this time, his wife was crying, and her sisters were saying, "Don't cry, sister, don't cry." And then the man stood there for a while, looking up at the sky, or maybe over at the long red mesa behind the village. And then pretty soon he started hoeing weeds again. Anyway, they were ignoring him like he didn't matter now that that other woman was gone. And so that's what happened. And everybody was laughing and laughing when they heard about it at Laguna. We were all laughing and laughing about what happened at Mesita. And then there was this time at Laguna, this man was going up the hill to the toilet, and it was nighttime, and he heard funny sounds coming from one of the old barns on the side of the hill. He thought he better go check up on things in case some animal was trapped in there or something like that. So he opened up the door and shined his flashlight in there, and here was this man, really respected in the community because he always worked hard and hardly ever got drunk. Well, there he was, laying there naked with this woman who was big and fat and had 12 kids. And here it was, the middle of winter, and they were both naked there. This man who found them didn't exactly know what to say, so he closed the door again, and he went back home, and he even forgot that he had to go to the toilet. And I guess he told someone, because pretty soon everybody heard about it, and we were all laughing because that man was so skinny and small, and she was so heavy and fat. And someone said that this man sure was taking a chance messing around with her, because she was so big, all she'd have to do is roll over on him, and that would be the end. You have to understand about the attitudes at home, despite Christianity and so forth, towards this sort of thing. It's not quite the same as if I was telling this story and this happened to a suburban housewife in Tucson. I realize that in Anglo-Saxon law and Anglo-Saxon culture, this sort of thing is grounds for instantaneous divorce and destruction and all kinds of terrible things. But at home, it was more of a game, I guess, to see if you could keep from being found out, and see if you could get down to the cornfield and back again without your husband finding out. And if someone cried over it, they cried over it because of these stories would be going around, not so much for the deed, but just the fact that everyone was going, there goes Mrs. So-and-so, did you hear about what happened? That kind of thing. Anyway, so it's meant, these things go around there, and it's in a much more light-hearted manner, I think, than what you might be sort of used to ordinarily. The reasons for this go way back into the old time, and this next thing that I want to read to you is based on some of these very old-time kinds of stories. There's a series of legends, myths, involving a woman. They call her Yellow Woman, Cochinacua, and she appears in different kinds of stories. She seems to take on different personalities and depending on the stories. But when I was a little kid, we used to hear these stories, and I think that what comes through through the stories is this easy attitude towards these certain things. This piece is called Storytelling, and this is the prologue. You should understand the way it was back then, because it is the same even now. Long ago it happened that her husband left to hunt deer before dawn, and then she got up and went to get water. Early in the morning, she walked to the river when the sun came over the long red mesa. He was waiting for her that morning in the tamarack and willow beside the river, buffalo man in buffalo leggings. Are you here already? Yes, he said. He was smiling. Because I came for you. She looked into the shallow, clear water. But where shall I put my water jar? Upside down, right here, he told her, on the riverbank. Part 2. You better have a damn good story, her husband said, about where you've been for the past 10 months and how you explain these twin baby boys. Part 3. No, that gossip isn't true. She didn't elope. She was kidnapped by that Mexican at Siama Feast. You know my daughter isn't that kind of girl. 4. It was in the summer of 1967. TV news reported a kidnapping. 4 Laguna women and 3 Navajo men headed north along the Rio Puerco River in a red 56 Ford. And the FBI and the state police were hot on their trail of wine bottles and size 42 panties hanging in bushes and trees all along the road. We couldn't escape them, he told police later. We tried, but there were 4 of them and only 3 of us. 5. It seems like it's always happening to me. Outside the dance hall door, late Friday night, in the summertime, and those brown-eyed men from Cubero smiling. They usually ask me, have you seen the way the stars shine up there in the sandhills? And I usually say, no, will you show me? Part 6. It was that Navajo from Alamo, you know, the tall, good-looking one. He told me he'd kill me if I didn't go with him. And then it rained so much and the roads got muddy. That's why it took so long to get back home. My husband left after he heard this story, moved back in with his mother. I don't blame him either. I could have told the story better than I did. Okay. Well, let's see. I think I'll do a story, one of this, move into this book of poems and do one other story. This is my favorite. I'm just doing my favorite things. I'll get to the poetry eventually. What is more conventionally poetry. This one's called Tush, a Laguna Coyote story. This is for Simon Ortiz. In the wintertime, at night, we tell coyote stories and drink spañada by the stove. How Coyote got his ratty old fur coat, bits of old fur the sparrows stuck on him with dabs of pitch. That was after he lost his proud original one in a poker game. Anyhow, things like that are always happening to him. That's what she said, anyway. And it happened to him at Laguna and Chinle and at Lucachucay too, because Coyote got too smart for his own good. But the Navajos say he won a contest once. It was to see who could sleep out in a snowstorm the longest, and Coyote waited until Chipmunk and Badger and Skunk were all curled up under the snow, and then he uncovered himself and slept all night inside. And before morning he got up and went out again, and waited until the others got up before he came in to take the prize. Some white men came to Acoma and Laguna 100 years ago, and they fought over Acoma land and Laguna women, and even now some of their descendants are howling in the hills southeast of Laguna. Charlie Coyote wanted to be governor, and he said when he got elected, he would run the other men off the reservation and keep all the women for himself. One year, the politicians got fancy at Laguna. They went door to door with hams and turkeys, and they gave them to anyone who would promise to vote for them. On election day, all the people stayed home and ate turkey and laughed. The Trans-Western Pipeline vice president came to discuss right-of-way. The Lagunas let him wait all day long because he is a busy and important man. And late in the afternoon, they told him to come back again tomorrow. They were after the picnic food that the special dancers left below the cliff, and Tosh and his cousins hung themselves over the cliff, holding each other's tail in their mouth, making a coyote chain, until someone in the middle farted and the guy behind him opened his mouth to say, "What stinks?" And they all went tumbling down like that. Howling and roaring, Tosh scattered white people out of bars all over Wisconsin. He bumped into them at the door until they said, "Excuse me," and the way Simon meant it was for 300 or maybe 400 years. Okay. You know, these kinds of things that I deal with in my stories are the kinds of things that the people at home enjoy a lot, and there's just a whole different attitude. I don't know. Anyway, and I just can't help it. I just have to. I just enjoy it too much myself to stay away from it. Sort of X-rated, I guess you might say. Okay. This is what I call more like of a poem rather than a storytelling thing. This one's called Prayer to the Pacific. I travel to the ocean, distant, from my southwest land of sandrock, to the moving blue water, big as the myth of origin. Pale, pale water in the yellow-white light of sun, floating west to China, where ocean herself was born. Clouds that blow across the sand are wet. Squat in the wet sand and speak to ocean. I return to you, turquoise, the red coral you sent us, sister spirit of earth. 4 round stones in my pocket, I carry back the ocean to suck and to taste. 30,000 years ago, Indians came riding across the ocean, carried by giant sea turtles. Waves were high that day. Great sea turtles waded slowly out from the gray sundown sea. Grandfather turtle rolled in the sand 4 times and disappeared, swimming into the sun. And so, from that time, immemorial, as the old people say, rain clouds drift from the west, gift from the ocean. Green leaves in the wind, wet earth on my feet, swallowing raindrops clear from China. This next poem I'm going to read is for all the people from up around Chinle, Lukachukai, Ganado, Greasewood, all that good country up there where I spent so much time. It's good country. I was teaching at Navajo Community College while I was living up there. I lived down in Chinle, and I used to commute every day. I used to drive about, 16 miles one way up every day, and just driving along, I used to see some things. And these 2 poems here, well, that's where they came from. This one's called Horses at Valley Store. Every day I meet the horses. With dust and heat they come, step by step, pulling the day behind them. At Valley Store there is water, gray steel tank, narrow concrete trough. Eyes that smell water, in a line, one by one, moving with the weight of the sun, moving through the deep earth heat, they come. People with water barrels and pickups and wagons. So they pause, and from their distance, outside of time, they wait. And this one's called Preparations. Dead sheep beside the highway, belly burst open, guts and life unwinding on the sand. The body is carefully attended. Look at the long black wings, the shining eyes. Solemn and fat, the crows gather to make preparations. Pull wool from skin, pick meat from bone, tendon from muscle. Only a few more days, they say to each other, a few more days and this will be finished. Bones, bones, let wind polish the bones. It is done. Okay, I've been writing some poetry in Alaska. It's sort of difficult to go away from some place where you lived all your life. Yeah, I mean, you guys can probably understand that. Anyway, I got up to Alaska, and it's taken a while to sort of get a feeling for the area up there. It's all surrounded by ocean. I live on an island up there, and I get seasick real easy, and I can't swim, and I stay away from the ocean. But the mountains up there, they have very powerful, beautiful mountains, and I guess I think of home when I can look at the mountains. So I've been doing some mountain poems, and this is one of the first ones I did. Dark branches, dark leaves, snow deep in sky that encloses the mountain. The sun is hidden in green moss feathers that cling to the gray alder branches. On the mountain, within the endless white sky, spruce trees entangle the snow, and only the silence dances free. By the time I wrote the spruce tree poem, the snow winds came and the mountain was gone. This one's called Coming Home. It's an Alaskan mountain poem too. We passed through here once, a long time ago, and you must expect to leave something behind as you pass. It was the mountain, chanting round Kisani winds, tonight dancing, all painted black, splashed with constellations, the Pleiades, Orion. I wake up past midnight to listen. The bull roarer whirls, cloud calling in distant north mountains. The snow singing answers, we will be with you for as long as the moon is born frozen from the backbone of the mountain, from the stillness of gray stone, 4,000 feet high. Leave something behind, they said. You never know. You might come back again this way, and then you will be home. Okay, I write short fiction. I also write, I'm trying to write a novel too. I have a short story that just came out not too long ago. It's not in the anthology that some people here have read. It's a new story. And I'd like to read it to you, except that I'm always hesitant to make audiences sit through a short story being read out loud. I read this to an audience at Ellensburg, Washington, a couple of months ago, and not too many of them fell asleep. But I don't know whether you would be interested in having the short story read to you, or whether you would rather have more poems. It's sort of up to you.
Is that what you want to read?
Well, I like my stories. I just, as far as reading to a group, it's just the length that makes me hesitant. I don't know if. Okay, we'll try it. You can politely close your eyes and snuggle down in your chair, and it's all right with me. This one's called Lullaby. This is part one. The sun had gone down, but the snow and the wind gave off its own light. It came in thick tufts like new wool, washed before the weaver spins it. Aya reached out for it like her babies had, and she smiled when she remembered how she had laughed at them. She was an old woman now, and her life had become memories. She sat down with her back against the wide cottonwood tree, feeling the rough bark on her backbones. She faced east and listened to the wind and snow sing a high-pitched Yebiche song. Out of the wind she felt warmer. She could watch the wide, fluffy snow fill in her tracks steadily until the direction she had come from was gone. By the light of the snow, she could see the dark outline of the big arroyo a few feet away. She was sitting on the edge of Cibolleta Creek, where in the springtime the thin cows would graze on grass already chewed flat to the ground. In the wide, deep creek bed, where only a trickle of water flowed in the summer, the skinny cows would wander, looking for new grass along winding paths splashed with manure. Aya pulled the old army blanket over her head like a shawl, Jimmy's blanket, the one he had sent to her. That was a long time ago, and the green wool was faded, and it was unraveling on the edges. She did not want to think about Jimmy. So she thought about the weaving and the way her mother had done it, on the tall wooden loom set into the sand under a tamarack tree for shade. She could see it clearly. She had only been a little girl when her grandma gave her the wooden combs to pull the twigs and burrs from the raw, freshly washed wool. And while she combed the wool, her grandma sat beside her, spinning a silvery strand of yarn around the smooth cedar spindle. Her mother worked at the loom with yarns dyed bright yellow and red and gold. She watched them dye the yarn in boiling black pots full of beeweed petals, juniper berries, and sage. The blankets her mother made were soft and woven so tight that rain rolled off of them like birds' feathers. Aya remembered sleeping warm on cold, windy nights, wrapped in her mother's blankets on the Hogan's sandy floor. The snow drifted now, with a northwest wind hurling it in gusts. It drifted up around her black overshoes, old ones with little metal buckles. She smiled at the snow which was trying to cover her little by little. She could remember when they had no rubber overshoes, only the high buckskin leggings they wrapped over their elk-hide moccasins. If the snow was dry or frozen, a person could walk all day and not get wet, and in the evenings the beams of the ceiling would hang with lengths of pale buckskin leggings drying out slowly. She felt peaceful, remembering. She didn't feel cold anymore. Jimmy's blanket seemed warmer than it had ever been, and she could remember that morning he was born. She could remember whispering to her mother, who was sleeping on the other side of the hogan, to tell her it was time now. She did not want to wake the others. The second time she called to her, her mother stood up and pulled on her shoes. She knew. They walked to the old stone hogan together, Aya walking a step behind her mother. She waited alone, learning the rhythms of the pains, while her mother went to call the old woman to help them. The morning was already warm, even before dawn, and Aya smelled the bee flowers blooming and the young willows growing at the springs. She could remember that so clearly, but his birth merged into the births of the other children, and to her it became all the same birth. They named him for the summer morning, and in English they called him Jimmy. It wasn't like Jimmy died. He just never came back. And one day, a dark blue sedan with white writing on its doors pulled up in front of the boxcar shack where the rancher let the Indians live. A man in a khaki uniform trimmed in gold gave him a yellow piece of paper and told him that Jimmy was dead. He said the army would try to get the body back, and then it would be shipped to them. But it wasn't likely because the helicopter had burned after it crashed. All of this was told to Chato because he could understand English. She stood inside the doorway holding the baby while Chato listened. Chato spoke English like a white man, and he spoke Spanish too. He was taller than the white man, and he stood straighter too. Chato didn't explain why. He just told the military man they could keep the body if they found it. The white man looked bewildered. He nodded his head and he left. Then Chato looked at her and shook his head. "God damn," he said in English. And then he told her, "Jimmy isn't coming back home anymore." And when he spoke, he used the words to speak of the dead. She didn't cry then, but she hurt inside with anger. And she mourned him as the years passed, when a horse fell on Chato and broke his leg, and the white rancher told him he wouldn't pay Chato until he could work again. She mourned Jimmy because he would have worked for his father then. He would have saddled the big bay horse and ridden the fence lines each day with wire cutters and heavy gloves, fixing the breaks in the barbed wire and putting the stray cattle back inside again. She mourned him after the white doctors came to take Danny and Ella away. She was at the shack alone that day when they came. It was back in the days before they hired Navajo women to go with them as interpreters. She recognized one of the doctors. She had seen him at the children's clinic at Canyoncito about a month before. They were wearing khaki uniforms, and they waved papers at her and a black ballpoint pen, trying to make her understand their English words. She was frightened by the way they looked at the children, like the lizard watches the fly. Danny was swinging on the tire swing in the elm tree behind the rancher's house, and Ella was toddling around the front door, dragging the broomstick horse Chato had made for her. Aya could see they wanted her to sign the papers, and Chato had taught her to sign her name. It was something she was proud of. She only wanted them to go and to take their eyes away from her children. She took the pen from the man without looking at his face, and she signed the paper in 3 different places he pointed to. She stared at the ground by their feet and waited for them to leave. But they stood there and began to point and gesture at the children. Danny stopped swinging. Aya could see his fear. She moved suddenly and grabbed Ella into her arms. The child squirmed, trying to get back to her toys. Aya ran with the baby towards Danny. She screamed for him to run, and then she grabbed him around the chest and carried him too. She ran south into the foothills of juniper trees and black lava rock. And behind her she heard the doctors running. But they had been taken by surprise, and the hills became steeper, and the cholla cactus were thicker, so they stopped. When she reached the top of the hill, she stopped too to listen in case they were circling around her. But in a few minutes, she heard a car engine start, and they drove away. The children had been too surprised to cry while she ran with them. Danny was shaking, and Ella's little fingers were gripping Aya's blouse. She stayed up in the hills for the rest of the day, sitting on a black lava boulder in the sunshine where she could see for miles all around her. The sun warmth relaxed her and took the fear and anger away. She lay back on the rock and watched the sky. It seemed to her that she could walk into the sky, stepping through clouds endlessly. Danny played with little pebbles and stones, pretending they were birds' eggs and then little rabbits. Ella sat at her feet and dropped fistfuls of dirt into the breeze, watching the dust and particles of sand intently. Aya watched a hawk soar high above them, dark wings gliding. Hunting or only watching, she didn't know. The hawk was patient, and he circled all afternoon before he disappeared around the high volcanic peak the Mexicans call Guadalupe. Late in the afternoon, Aya looked down at the gray boxcar shack with the paint all peeled from the wood. The stovepipe on the roof was rusted and crooked. The fire she had built that morning in the oil drum stove had burned out. Ella was asleep in her lap now, and Danny sat close to her, complaining that he was hungry. He asked when they would go back to the house. "We'll stay up here until your father comes," she told him, "because those white men were chasing us." The boy remembered then, and he nodded at her silently. If Jimmy had been there, he could have read those papers and explained to her what they said. Aya would have known then never to sign them. The doctors came back the next day, and they brought a BIA policeman with them. They told Chato they had her signature, and that was all they needed, except for the kids. She listened to Chato sullenly. She hated him when he told her it was the old woman who died in the winter, spitting blood. It was her old grandmother who had given the children this disease. They don't spit blood, she said coldly. The whites lie. She held Ella and Danny close to her, ready to run to the hills again. I want a medicine man first, she said to Chato, not looking at him. He shook his head. It's too late now. The policeman is with them. You signed the paper. His voice was gentle. It was worse than if they had died. To lose the children and to know that somewhere, in a place called Colorado, in a place full of sick and dying strangers, her children were without her. There had been babies that had died soon after they were born, and one that died before he could walk. She had carried them herself up to the boulders and great pieces of cliff that long ago crashed down from Long Mesa. She laid them in the crevices of sandstone and buried them in fine brown sand with round quartz pebbles that washed down from the hills in the rain. She had endured it because they had been with her, but she could not bear this pain. She did not sleep for a long time after they took her children. She stayed on the hill where they fled the first time, and she slept rolled up in the blanket Jimmy had sent her. She carried the pain in her belly, and it was fed by everything she saw, the blue sky of their last day together, and the dust and pebbles they played with. The swing and the elm tree and the broomstick horse choked life from her. The pain filled her stomach, and there was no room for food or for her lungs to fill with air. The air and the food would have been theirs. She hated Chato, not because he let the policemen and doctors put the screaming children in the government car, but because he had taught her to sign her name, because it was like the old ones always told her about learning their language or any of their ways. It endangered you. She slept alone on the hill until the middle of November when the first snows came. Then she made a bed for herself where the children had slept. She did not lay down beside Chato again until many years later, when he was sick and shivering and only her body could keep him warm. The illness came after the white rancher told Chato he was too old to work for him anymore, and Chato and his old woman should be out of the shack by the next afternoon, because the rancher had hired new people to work there. That had satisfied her, to see how the white man repaid Chato's years of loyalty and work. All of Chato's fine-sounding English talk didn't change things. Part 2. It snowed steadily, and the luminous light from the snow gradually diminished into the darkness. Somewhere in Cebolleta a dog barked, and other village dogs joined with it. Aya looked into the direction she had come from the bar where Chato was buying the wine. Sometimes he told her to go on ahead and wait, and then he never came. And when she finally went back looking for him, she would find him passed out at the bottom of the wooden steps to Azie's bar. All the wine would be gone, and most of the money too, from the pale blue check that came to them once a month in a government envelope. It was then that she would look at his face and his hands scarred by the ropes and the barbed wire of all those years, and she would think, this man is a stranger. For 40 years she had smiled at him and cooked his food, and he remained a stranger. She stood up again with the snow almost to her knees, and she walked back to find Chato. It was hard to walk in the deep snow, and she felt the air burn in her lungs. She stopped a short distance from the bar to rest and readjust the blanket. But this time he wasn't waiting for her at the bottom step, with his old Stetson hat pulled down and his shoulders hunched up in his long wool overcoat. She was careful not to slip on the wooden steps. When she pushed the door open, warm air and cigarette smoke hit her in the face. She looked around slowly and deliberately in every corner, in every dark place that the old man might find to sleep. The bar owner didn't like Indians in there, especially Navajos, but he let Chato come in because he could talk Spanish like he was one of them. The men at the bar stared at her, and the bartender saw that she left the door wide open. Snowflakes were flying inside like moths and melting into a puddle on the oiled wood floor. He motioned at her to close the door, but she did not see him. She held herself straight and walked across the room slowly, searching the room with every step. The snow in her hair melted, and she could feel it on her forehead. At the far corner of the room, she saw red flames at the mica window of an old stove door. She looked behind the stove just to make sure. The bar got quiet then, except for the Spanish polka music playing on the jukebox. She stood by the stove and shook the snow from her blanket and held it near the stove to dry. The wet wool smell reminded her of newborn goats in early March, brought inside to warm near the fire. She felt calm. In past years they would have told her to get out, but her hair was white now and her face was wrinkled. They looked at her like she was a spider crawling slowly across the room. They were afraid. She could feel the fear. She looked at their faces steadily. They reminded her of the first time the white people brought her children back to her that winter. Danny had been shy and hid behind the thin white woman who brought them, and the baby had not known her until Aya took her into her arms, and then Ella had nuzzled close to her as she had when she was nursing. The blonde woman was nervous and kept looking at a dainty gold watch on her wrist. She sat on the bench near the small window and watched the dark snow clouds gather around the mountains. She was worried about the unpaved road. She was frightened by what she saw inside, too, the strips of venison drying on the rope across the ceiling, and the children jabbering excitedly in a language she did not know. So they stayed for only a few hours. Aya watched the government car disappear down the road, and she knew that they were already being weaned away from these lava hills and from this sky. The last time they came was in early June, and Ella stared at her the way the men in the bar were now staring. Aya did not try to pick her up. She smiled at her instead and spoke cheerfully to Danny. When he tried to answer her, he could not seem to remember, and he spoke English words with the Navajo. But he gave her a scrap of paper that he had found somewhere and carried in his pocket. It was folded in half, and shyly he looked up at her and said, "It was a bird." She asked Chato if they were home for good this time. He spoke to the white woman, and she shook her head. "How much longer?" he asked, and she said she didn't know. But Chato saw how she stared at the boxcar shack. Aya turned away then. She did not say goodbye. Part 3. She felt satisfied that the men in the bar feared her. Maybe it was her face and the way she held her mouth with teeth clenched tight, like there was nothing anyone could do to her now. She walked north down the road, searching for the old man. She did this because she had the blanket, and there would be no place for him except with her and the blanket in the old adobe barn near the arroyo. They always slept there when they came to Cibolleta. If the money and the wine were gone, she would be relieved, because then they could go home again, back to the old hogan with a dirt roof and rock walls where she herself had been born. And the next day the old man could go back to the few sheep they still had, to follow along behind them, guiding them into dry, sandy arroyos where sparse grass grew. She knew he did not like walking behind old ewes, when for many years he rode big quarter horses and worked with cattle, but she wasn't sorry for him. He should have known all along it would happen. There had not been enough rain for their garden in 5 years, and that was when Chato finally hitched a ride into the town and brought back brown boxes of rice and sugar and big tin cans of welfare peaches. After that, at the first of the month, they went to Cibolleta to ask the postmaster for the check, and then Chato would go to the bar and cash it. They did this as they planted the garden every May, not because anything would survive the summer dust, but because it was time to do this. And the journey past the days that smelled silent and dry, like the caves above the canyon, with yellow painted buffaloes on their walls. Part 4. He was walking along the pavement when she found him. He did not stop or turn around when he heard her behind him. She walked beside him, and she noticed how slowly he moved now. He smelled strong of wood smoke and urine. Lately he had been forgetting. Sometimes he called her by his sister's name, and she had been gone for a long time. Once she had found him wandering on the road back to the white man's ranch, and she asked him why he was going that way. He laughed at her and said, "You know they can't run that ranch without me," and he walked on determined, limping on the leg that had been crushed many years before. Now he looked at her curiously, as if for the first time, but he kept shuffling along, moving slowly along the side of the highway. His gray hair had grown long and spread out on the shoulders of the long overcoat. He wore the old felt hat pulled down over his ears. His boots were worn out at the toes, and he had stuffed pieces of an old red shirt in the holes. The rags made his feet look like little animals up to their ears in snow. She laughed at his feet, and the snow muffled the sound of her laugh. He stopped and looked at her again. The wind had quit blowing, and the snow was falling straight down. The southeast sky was beginning to clear, and Aya could see a star. "Let's rest a while," she said to him. They walked away from the road and up the slope to the giant boulders that had tumbled down from the red sandrock mesa throughout the centuries of rainstorms and earth tremors. In a place where the boulders shut out the wind, they sat down with their backs against the rock. She offered half of the blanket to him, and they sat wrapped together. The storm passed swiftly. The clouds moved east. They were massive and full, crowding together across the sky. She watched them with the feeling of horses, steely blue-gray horses startled across the sky, the powerful haunches pushed into the distances, and the tail hairs streamed white mist behind them. The sky cleared. Aya saw that there was nothing between her and the stars. The light was crystalline. There was no shimmer, no distortion through earth haze. She breathed the clarity of the night sky. She smelled the purity of the half moon and the stars. He was lying on his side with his knees pulled up near his belly for warmth. His eyes were closed now, and in the light from the stars and the moon, he looked young again. She could see it descend out of the night sky, an icy stillness from the edge of the thin moon. She recognized the freezing. It came gradually, sinking snowflake by snowflake until the crust was heavy and deep. It had the strength of the stars in Orion, and its journey was endless. Aya knew that with the wine he would sleep. He would not feel it. She tucked the blanket around him, remembering how it had been when Ella had been with her, and she felt the rush so big inside her heart for the babies. And she sang the only songs she knew to sing for babies. She could not remember if she had ever sung it to her children, but she knew that her grandmother had sung it and her mother had sung it. The earth is your mother, she holds you. The sky is your father, he protects you. Sleep, sleep. Rainbow is your sister, she loves you. The winds are your brothers, they sing to you. Sleep, sleep. We are together always. We are together always. There never was a time when this was not so. If anybody has any questions about, I don't mind answering questions about, you guys are probably tired, but if anyone has any questions that they want to ask about what I read or things that in the anthology or any kinds of questions, I'm happy to answer questions. Yeah.
How long have you been writing?
Oh, I've been writing ever since I was a little kid. I've been writing seriously since about 1967. Yes.
Was that your song, or was that an old song that you...
No, it's mine. I try. One thing I try not. I don't know if whether it is I try not to do it, but what I'm interested in is new things. I mean, things that are my own, that come out of a feeling or a sense of the traditional songs, but not to use. Not that it's wrong to sort of use the ritual songs and ceremonial songs and things like that, but I'd rather come up with my own kinds of things and say, that they're sort of from the same feeling,
I felt it was that. I think actually, to me that works because it's not only elemental, it means that you are continuing the tradition with the living. It comes alive that way rather than being merely a nostalgic echo. You let it live in you.
Oh, yeah. Glad you see it that way. Any other? I was sort of worried. When I wrote the story, the character's a Navajo woman, and I said to somebody, that when people studied it and read it, they should read it as an attempt by a Pueblo person to create a Navajo character, which is necessarily, there's certain things there, like about the death thing and stuff like that. I know it's, but I thought to myself, well, that's who I am, and I really wanted to do this woman, and I would never claim that my Navajo woman was a Navajo woman. She's a Laguna woman's version of a Navajo woman, and that was one thing. Sometimes I'm a little timid about doing that, but anyhow, that was just something I wanted to say. Are there any other questions? Yeah.
Have you had a chance to get to know the indigenous people in Alaska at all?
The indigenous people? Yeah. I've made some friends up there. They're town Indian people, and my experience has always been with growing up on the reservation, and I'm not sure whether the differences I see are because these are urban people, or I'm sure part of it though is that the Tlinkits and Haidas and Tsimshians are different sort of people. I think I'd have to be there a long time to really say, oh yeah, I know. I have some friends and acquaintances, but to get a real feeling for that land and for the cultures of the way, it takes a long time, I think. Yeah.
You write everything in English?
Yeah, pretty much so. That's Simon Ortiz and I talk about this all the time. We like to. There's a challenge to working with the English and coming up with something with our based upon the way we speak English at home, with the different rhythms and so on, to come up with something a little bit different than your usual kind of English. The only place where I sometimes beginnings and endings of the chants, which are not translatable anyway. Those are nice. I like to make up my own, and there aren't any in there's some in this novel I'm writing now, but yeah, work in English. Anybody else have yeah? Oh, thank you. Thank you. I'm glad you thought so.
Thank you.
Okay.
I should do a couple of things that Leslie won't do, and that's plug what she's written. The anthologies that she's referred to is a thing called The Man to Send Rain Clouds, which many of you have probably seen. It's edited by Kenneth Rosen and published by the Viking Press in 1974. She has a book of poems published by the Greenfield Press, is it?
Yeah.
Titled Laguna Woman, and that was also published in 1974. So I'd like to thank Leslie for being here on behalf of the Amarin Club and the American Indian Studies Department, which sponsored her visit, and I'd like to thank you for coming.